This is an excerpt from Chapter 8 of the book Secret Invasion by Hans Kristian and David Hunt. There was no Berlin Wall as yet, and East Germans, by the tens of thousands, were turning their backs on the communist paradise to flee into West Berlin. From Berlin, Hamburg alone was receiving more than 1,000 refugees a day in its processing camps, where they were temporarily housed until they could be absorbed into other parts of the country. One of these camps, which normally contained about 10,000 refugees, was located on an old military base that had inexplicably escaped the Allied bombs. Living conditions were horrible, with as many as 20 people crowded into each of the tiny rooms partitioned off in the old barracks. These were people who had escaped with little more than the clothes on their backs. People to whom freedom was worth the loss of the accumulated savings and possessions of a lifetime. I joined an independent youth group involved in spreading the gospel at this large refugee camp. We would walk through the barracks singing hymns, passing out tracts, and inviting everyone to our meetings. Each week, we gathered about 500 children together in an old garage for Sunday school. And following that, we usually had about 300 adults in another meeting. As a result, many among both children and adults received Christ. At this camp, I had my first contact with people from Eastern Europe, never dreaming that one day my life would be devoted to spreading the gospel in that area of the world. Some of these escapees were Christians, and I remember in my zeal reproving them for leaving their country. "But they need your Christian witness back there," I argued one Sunday afternoon as I scolded a young escapee who had just arrived at the camp. "If all the Christians escape, who is going to tell the people that are left about Christ?" "How can you be my judge when you don't know what it's like to live in East Germany?" replied the handsome young man quietly. There was pain and sorrow in his voice, as though I had uncovered a deep wound. I was the best student in my class, yet they told me I wasn't intelligent enough to continue and made me quit school when I was 15 because I was a Christian. For years the teachers had tried to get me to abandon my faith, but I could not deny Christ. I would rather die. I tried to get a job as an apprentice to learn the trade. I was willing to do anything, but people in my town were afraid to hire me. They knew I'd been put out of school for being a Christian. I didn't want to leave my parents, or my town, or the friends in my church. But after 3 years of picking up odd jobs here and there, with no opportunity to use the intelligence and the talents God had given me, I knew there was no other way. On my 18th birthday, I said to my parents, "Mother and Father, I thank you for everything you've done for me, especially that you brought me up to believe in Jesus Christ as my Savior. I love you very much, and I don't want to leave you, but I have no future here." We embraced one another and cried. The look on my mother's face nearly killed me, but they didn't tell me not to go. I don't know if I'll ever see them again on this earth. There was a Christian family with whom I had become acquainted living in the next barracks. My wife went alone, Mr. Schultz told me. Our eldest daughter, who was just 17, took our youngest, the 9-year-old. She led him to East Berlin and then across the border. Our 11 and 14-year-olds went together. They had to walk at night and hide during the day. The whole family traveling together would have attracted too much attention. I was the last person to leave the house. I gathered all our personal papers and burned them in the fireplace. Then I walked through the house, through every room, touching the furniture, looking out the windows at the familiar landscape that had become almost a part of me. My father had built the house, and I had been born in it. In the living room, I stood for half an hour without moving, looking at my father's picture that had smiled down upon our family from above the fireplace for so many years. I didn't have a small photograph of him to take with me. It was like tearing my heart out by the roots when I finally turned my back and walked outside. Pulling the key from my pocket, I started to unlock the door when I realized how ridiculous it was. I threw the key inside on the floor, shut the door, and left. I never looked back. I can understand others fleeing to the West, but for a Christian? I struggled to find the right words to ask him if he knew that he had run away from his Christian duty, afraid to criticize him as bluntly as I had the other escapees more nearly my age. "It was for our children's sake," he said quickly, emotion nodding in his voice. "My wife and I could bear it, but we had to consider our children. I know you think we should have stayed to tell others about Jesus, and we would have if it had only been the two of us. But our children, we couldn't allow them to be raised under a system that does everything it can to force atheism on its citizens. It's going to be hard making a new start here, but at least we'll be free to believe what we want to believe, and the children won't be tempted to deny their faith in order to get an education or a job." The stories the refugees told me of injustice and oppression, coupled with the obvious desperation that had driven them to exchange everything they had for freedom, brought back memories of the occupation of my own country during the war. Those traumatic days had slipped, like a dream, into a misty past with the rest of my childhood. It was so easy to forget, but now I was faced again with the inhumanity of man to man. The stark reality of human suffering struck me as forcibly as a hard blow to the face each time I walked through those crowded barracks and looked into the faces and eyes that said more than words could ever express. Deeper implications of my newfound relationship to God through Jesus Christ began to stir within me as I struggled to understand the teaching of Christ in the context of the world as I was beginning to see it. Already I had ceased to think of Christianity as a form or ritual to be acted out in church, but now, for the first time, I began to think of it as a revolution, that Jesus Christ had not come to establish a religion, but to take over this world. Dimly at first, but with growing clarity and conviction, I came to believe that until he ruled this world, there could be no real peace or justice. That his kingdom could not be established through social reform, new political programs, or ideologies, much less through war, seemed obvious. It was in the heart of each man that Christ must reign. He had not come to raise an army to contend in fields of battle, or to form a new religious organization that would negotiate compromises and treaties with nations. His call was to individuals to give him their hearts, to follow him alone, to come and die with him, to accept in his death the end of their own lives, and out of this death a new world of resurrected men would arise, to live new lives under Christ's control, to form a new society, God's kingdom, as different from every earthly kingdom or human dream of utopia as light is from darkness, as truth is from a lie.